Friends, we have listened to three interesting perspectives from development. One, the movement from MDGs to SDGs, how there could be new norms of sustainability built into our way of looking at development. Second, Islamic finance as a site of distributive justice, where ideology plays a role, the philosophy of Islam plays a role, and not simply the expectation of making a profit. The third is a critique of capability approach, the idea of collective capability instead of individual capability, and this is supposed to be based on the social interaction within a community being given importance rather than the individual. Now, all these three presentations are open for discussion. Please raise your hands and be brief. Here's his hand first. Yeah, yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I found all of them tremendous papers.
Thank you. Fantastic. I learned something from everyone and discussed them for a long time. But I'll focus a question, if I may, to May. It's really a bit more information about, at one point you said in Islamic finance, money is treated as a medium of exchange. Does that expressly include thinking of it as a store of value? I mean, I think that's quite an important aspect of the project if it is. And just related to that, the other question I wanted to ask was, hold on, where are we? I'll just ask that. I've forgotten what the other one was. It was a while ago now.
We'll take a bunch of questions and then...
Yeah. Oh no, sorry, it's about fiduciary duty. Fiduciary duty. This is investment managers, for example, have an obligation to maximize profits on investment. Clearly, that would be something that would seem problematic from an Islamic point of view. So I just wondered if there is a concept of fiduciary duty which is alternative to that.
To Professor Sengupta a little more. Actually, the question of a derivative obligation that you have talked about in terms of moral worth between one individual and another, and try to sort of extrapolate it in the larger global context in arriving at new sustainability goals, retains a fundamental contradiction between finances on the one hand, and on the other hand roles and a variety of actors who define themselves in terms of the possible roles that they are going to take. Actually, there is a big disjunction between these three elements if we take it as a kind of a framework. As an empirical way of doing things, this is quite successful. But in terms of building up a theory of sustainability, one has to really see exactly in what way we can connect moral worth, finance, and role-driven actors together in a kind of a whatever high-profile political platform. And a short technical question to mind. Actually, the idea of annihilation of the self, as Sufis would talk about, Salala, for example. From a Salala point of view, this whole idea of Islamic finance actually looks pretty trivial. Now, if we are just engaged into worldly business, then of course, there are ways and means in which you can avoid falling into the trap of gathering interest and yet continue with the financial dealings. Probably your presentation looked to me as ways of avoiding into falling into a trap. Then really talking of a redeeming way of using Islamic finance in the right way of, right context of Islam. And very, very shortly, probably collective intentionality also needs to be developed more in understanding, collective agency, and also that will lead to collective sense of responsibility, which will be having a larger addition to capability approach. So please take responsibility in account, and I like it.
Well, I want to comment that I liked very much the three papers, very interesting. I have no questions for Nito. take out a question for May. I understood, maybe I'm wrong, but I understood that the Islamic laws which you analyze are more pro-equality than other laws prevailing in the world. So how do you reconcile that with the fact that some of the Islamic countries are the most unequal countries in the world, some of them? And if you have data about income distribution in Islam as a whole, and if you could compare that with the income distribution in other regions of the world, so to relate your analysis with reality. And I have a comment on Gyanaranjan. The comment is on how we understand the capability approach. You criticize him for not understanding the structures which cause human rights denial. That's not the purpose of the capability approach. I'm very critical of the capability approach. But the capability approach is only to change the constitutive element of the human good, to delete utility and substitute it by something else, what you can do and have. Be and do what you can be and you can be functioning. So being only at that level of abstraction, it cannot be a general methodology to analyze reality. To analyze reality, one needs general methodologies like Marxism or current economic ideas or things like that.
Okay, sir.
Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mine is just an observation and a comment to me too, not a testing. I was quite encouraged when I heard you say that the SDGs, unlike the MDGs, are now obviously concentrating on the private actors like multinational corporations, and that it is no longer just the reserve of the government and of developing countries. But also the comment that you made that in the report itself, there seems to be discussion on the need for multinational companies to desist from refusing or evading payment of taxes. And I was thinking that even in the SDG we will see something to the effect that private actors like multinationals will be required obviously to ensure that where they are operating they are paying tax. This comes in the context of the research that I have been doing that shows that illicit financial outflow of capital out of developing countries actually constitutes a large portion of development finance that can actually be used in order to alleviate poverty and to spur economic growth in developing countries. And it is lamentable that this is not actually found in the recommendation and SDGs. And I was encouraging you that maybe we should consider developing the paper further and recommending that that should actually be something that needs to be considered, because there is this substantial, potentially substantial form of new finance for the development of economic growth and for alleviating poverty in developing countries. Thank you.
You raised your hand, right?
Well, my question was in some part already asked. It was for May. Thank you for your great account of Islamic finance as a means to generate distributive justice. I was wondering if you could give examples of this in practice. So it's possible.
Okay, why don't we get responses quickly and then go to the second round of questions. We'll start with Mary.
Well, I don't know if there were any questions asked to me actually, but I just wanted to respond. Oops. add to the comment about the illicit financial flows, and they are actually mentioned in the report, as I said, and they're also mentioned in the proposed goals of the high-level panel. But and we don't know, and I think there's a strong likelihood that they're going to be mentioned again in the Sustainable Development Goals. But the issue really is about, even if the IFFs are mentioned as an issue, there's no agent assigned to it. Then there's no agent really assigned to that goal or the target, and I'm not sure how effective that will be. So I think we will probably see the illicit financial flows being mentioned in the Sustainable Development Goals, because everyone is talking about it, the OECD. It's actually in the list of proposed goals. So we probably will see it, but as I said, that with the IFFs, you still have to specify who is responsible, which countries, which multinational, and also actually mention that the multinational corporations have agent responsibility. So the question is how we'll see it being formulated as a goal and target. It'll probably be a target under the larger global governance goal that we'll probably see in the SDGs.
The question is, how do you elaborate the theme of...
Well, thank you all for your questions. Let me start with Tim's question. Money in it, it is a concept in Islam that money is not actually a commodity. It doesn't have a value. It's only there for exchange. And this is also not only relevant to store of value, so you cannot use it as a store of value, but also as a time value. And this is actually one of the problems that happens, because Islamic finance, and this applies to more or less all the questions, because Islamic finance, the way it's practiced now, there are a few problems with it, because to a large extent it is trying to compete with the conventional system. So it's focusing, or the balance that I was trying to explain about the profit as well as the ethical aspects, leans a bit towards profit, because they are trying to find their niche and find their place within the market. So they're working more on the profit. So to a large extent, in some aspects, they try to mimic and try to use conventional finance as a benchmark. And this is why in some of the practices they use the time value of money. And this is one of the problems that actually happens with Islamic finance. So this is related, I think, also to your question, that what I'm trying to do is more like look at the practice, to be able to come up with a principle, to actually guide the practice further, to kind of come up to leave, where this trap you were talking about, because they are falling into the trap you're talking about. And I think this is what we need. We need to know what is it exactly, what are the principles we're trying to achieve, what is it exactly that we need to achieve with Islamic finance. It's not only, and this is a debate that's going on, the form over substance in Islamic finance. To a large extent, it becomes more Sharia-based, but it doesn't have the substance of the Sharia. It does not really do what it does. And this comes to your question about how it's functioning in the Arab world, especially. It's not only Islamic finance in the Arab world, so it's working together with conventional finance, so they're working hand in hand. To be fair, Islamic finance is still it's still an infant, really. It's not really a massive thing to talk about. It is 1.3 trillion within the overall world finance, which is not a lot. However, it's not about how much it is, but about the growth, because the rate of growth is 15 to 20%, and this is the actual fascinating thing about Islamic finance. So it is growing really fast. This is one thing. It's been practiced in 105 countries all over the world, including non-Islamic finance countries. So the potential is there, but we do need to come up with the principles, to know exactly what we need to do to be able to avoid falling in this trap and to move to the right direction. About the examples, the example that I have in mind at the moment is a study that's been done in Turkey about how Islamic finance compared to conventional finance there has contributed to the real economy. And as far as I remember in front of me, the figures, for the, of course, in proportion, it's a lot less because the Islamic finance is a lot less than the conventional finance, even in Turkey. However, it was 3%. It was 3% for the conventional finance in comparison to 5.7%. In real economy. So it's basically, it's not only channeling resources and wealth, but it's also contributing to real economy, because you do have to have investments rather than putting idle money or working only on interest. So the effect is there. Also the effect of zakah, there's plenty of literature and case studies that's been done on the effect of zakah, and it has quite done a lot in several countries. Unfortunately, I don't have the details on me, but I can bring them for you if you want. However, the problem again is that it's the growth rather than the scope. Until now, it's in infancy, but I think with time, if we do get to, I agree 100%, avoid this trap, it is a very important side of distributive justice and can contribute a lot. I think I did answer all the questions. Yeah. I think I have.
You have more?
No, I think I have answered all the questions. Hopefully so.
More questions will come.
Yeah.
Thank you for the comments. I have received two things. One is, it's given by Dr. Prasanji that, discussing about collective responsibilities as part of the collective capabilities thinking. It's actually a good suggestion, but there is a problem when we immediately identify with collective capabilities with collective responsibilities. Collective responsibilities have their own importance and they need to be discussed. But what I believe is that it cannot be discussed with collective capabilities simultaneously. Why I believe is that, this is again I am referring back to the Indian Constitution, that the colonial framework, that the moment we discuss about rights, when we finish rights, we discuss about duties. It's more or less like give and take relationship. So instead of discussing about collective responsibilities along with collective capabilities, what we can do is that collective responsibilities, we can discuss at a later stage and not simultaneously with collective capabilities, because it looks like as if we are discussing about the importance of collective freedoms, but at the same time we are also ensuring that they have these kind of duties for all of us. So, but in any case, collective responsibility is a very important thing to be discussed, which I actually missed in my presentation. Then the question that Professor has raised is sense capability approach. The original intention of sense capability approach was actually to challenge the utilitarian perspective. It began with those assumptions that utilitarianism is actually inadequate to understand human well-being. But gradually, Swain himself also discussed about the ideas of justice, and that's why he developed the book on idea of justice. And more importantly, when it's not actually Swain, but Swain's followers like Sabina Altair and many other people, they actually developed, poverty index to measure poverty using capability approach framework. So even though Swain has not used capability approach framework to understand and explain the causes of poverty, yet the school itself, the capability approach school, I believe they adequately try to explain through their multidimensional index of poverty. They try to explain what is the reason of poverty and many other things. So when I say capability approach, I believe Swain constitutes the major part of the analysis, but along with that, the entire school comes into the perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have a second round of questions. Okay, there are several hands on this side. Anyone on this side? No. Okay, I'll start from the back side. Yes, sir. Madam, yeah.
Myself, Karki. My question to Ma'am Swain Gupta.
Your microphone.
My question is the neoliberal economic policies that have unarguably generated massive wealth for some people, but at the most level, crucially, it has been failed to benefit the poor. So I just wanted to know that where is the gap and what are the measures to this?
This is addressed to whom? Okay. Yes, sir.
Hello. I also have a question for Ritu. So you mentioned the silent means when talking about these SDGs. Well, I mean, it's a typical norm in international law that international law will create an obligation for states, but how states implement those means is up to them. So my question is, but I acknowledge that you're saying there's this pattern that allows these orthodoxy perspectives. So my question is what type of means can be implemented that some states won't cry out as coercive or as taking away their autonomy to implement it within their own countries?
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
My question is for Mr. Gyanaranjan. I'm sorry I came too late and maybe I may have missed some of what you may have said. But my question is about, first of all, the forests were community rights during the colonial phase. And when these rights were taken away and they became part of the state took over the forest rights, it led to all sorts of difficulties, all sorts of problems. And they have been reported that they have created problems, social, economic, livelihood problems for all the people who live in those regions. Now, maybe the Forest Rights Act that you talked about has, to some extent, mitigated some of these problems. But there are still very severe problems, and these problems have been,
they have not been addressed
in different places. So, I would like to ask you, are you supporting that this type of Forest Rights Act has done good for the community as a whole, or do you think that this is, maybe a marginal improvement, but not really, because the livelihood, what should I say, not only livelihood, the very life of the people, especially the tribals, is affected. And one small question, just a small question, what did you mean by ontological individualism? I do not know this expression. If you could explain. Thank you, sir.
When you are talking about collective, you give an example of a community like the forest that was before. I just wonder if there is a conflict between two communities in the collective. Would that not create a problem in handling? As one possible. I'm talking about a more theoretical generalization. I see lots of problems here. Maybe I'm naive, but I think that's a valid question. And I'm quite curious of the Islamic law that you talked about. I have two questions to you. One is that if money is only an instrument of change and is not a commodity, stock exchange is an ultimate example of commodification of money as far as I can understand. You are an economist. Now, what would Sharia law view the entire stock exchange operations? Question one. And question two, let's say a good deal of oil is controlled by the West.
Sorry, can you raise your voice, please?
A good deal of oil trade is controlled by the West. Mm-hmm. How much of it is against the Sharia law?
Good question.
My question, can I? My question is addressed to ladies and
Just speak loud.
Yeah. So it's pertaining to sustainable development. I'd like to know something about it. Is there a reconciliation between the sustainable development and MGDs somewhere in terms of global justice vis-a-vis environmental protection and security? So could you throw some light, because we haven't yet, we are still engaged in some kind of a north-south debate and the blame game basically, and are not able to arrive at a consensus regarding especially the reduction of toxic emissions. So could you just throw some light or offer some kind of a panacea to this?
My question has been asked also on the difference between stock exchange and the partnership principle in Islamic finance.
Mine is just a follow-up, and it is in relation to the comment that has been made by me regarding the practicality of how to respond in the form of a goal to regulating illicit financial outflow of capital. Now, the reality is that many of those multinationals emanate out of developed countries. And what has happened is that in the case of the US, an example came in the form of the Dodd-Frank Act, which requires transparency and also prosecution for corruption that happens outside of the jurisdiction of the US, perpetrated by companies that originate from the US, operating outside of the US. And I think in that regard, something to that effect can actually be looked at. And it can be actually measurable as to whether the countries are actually doing that and implementing such measures so that their multinationals that are operating in the developing countries are actually not perpetrating fraud and are also not involved in corruption. And where they are, they can be prosecuted, even though the fraud doesn't happen within the jurisdiction of a developed country like the US. Coming to the issue of money not being a commodity. You made a conversation, Mai, that it is actually an observation that it is regarded for the purposes of transactions as having a time value. Now I am saying if it doesn't, it is regarded as having a time value, but still you don't have to charge interest. How do you take care of the depreciation of that value over time, except for maybe, is there any recognition of finance charges or something like that, which takes account of depreciation? Thank you.
Okay, that will be the last question.
My question is for me. I would like to listen from you some critical areas or problematic areas which is associated with theoretical understanding of Islamic related to finance.
So in what sense? In like the different schools or?
Yeah, do you find any problems with the way these being conceptualized?
Right. Okay, now the responses, Mitu.
Okay, so quickly, I wasn't actually on the question of means and the silence on the means. I wasn't actually suggesting that in the new SDGs that means should be specified. That would just not fly, and the SDGs would just not go through because as it wouldn't be politically feasible. What I was trying to say in the presentation was that the means should be a point of discussion at the national level, right? And so at that level, when we're discussing the means, I think it's really important to engage with the civil society actors and social movements and at the grassroots levels. So when we're talking about the means to reach these indicators and targets, their perspective becomes the more important one, and their perspective is prioritized, and that has to be really done at the national level, and those who are interested in poverty eradication have to make that effort. You know, it is collective action, it is public action, it's all of us together who can kind of make these targets and indicators work for us, because I think that there's some, I guess, it's from all the questions what I'm getting is, you know, that what are these goals and targets about? They're not a panacea. They're just really milestones that the international community is trying to set up. But whether they actually work or not, whether they work for genuine poverty eradication, I think a lot of engagement with the grassroots still needs to be done. It has to be a constant process of mobilization and consultation. It can't stop the moment that you have the SDGs announced, you know, in 2015. And, you know, what you were saying about sustainability, exactly. I think that that's a really big problem, that I alluded to that we have, you know, we have these conflicts between states over what sustainability means. And I'm personally sympathetic to the position of developing countries who are talking about growth and industrialization, and let's keep that on the agenda. We need to, you know, and at the same time, that's a huge challenge to mitigating climate change and really fighting climate change. So this is a huge balancing act. So, but I think a lot of things have to be worked out at the level of indicators. And going to what you were saying about the illicit financial flows, I think, what will the indicators look like? Can some of these specific things be put into the indicators so that we can actually be more specific about how we reach the targets? But I think the broader point I'm trying to make is that it has to be a constant, continual process of engagement and mobilization and consultation that has to go on in order to make these goals work when they do. And we can't expect them to be a panacea, and that's just being, too optimistic and too idealistic about what they're meant to be, what they're meant to do.
Right. First, let me explain that Islamic finance is not really perfection personification. It's got plenty of problems with Islamic finance, and this is why there are, when it comes to stock exchange, I haven't really. First of all, it's really beyond the scope of this paper or the scope of any paper actually to sum up Islamic finance because it's got plenty of literature on it. But what I've tried to do is to focus on these practices that do affect distribution as much, and that's one thing. And another criteria would be that they're not controversial. So I've tried to use the most non-controversial practices to derive my principles from, because it wouldn't make sense to derive principles on Islamic distributive justice from controversial practices. That wouldn't make sense. So this is why the practices that I've used are the non-controversial one. Again, it's not perfection by all means. It has a lot of substance over form, form over substance issues where they try to find a way around it, like when you mentioned like the stock exchange, when you've mentioned the oil trade. There's plenty of wrong things going on, and again, this is why I think these principles are very important to come up with principles that we can agree on to guide the practices, because the practices at the moment are like starting to shift, and more controversial practices are starting to emerge, and in this way you start to lose it. And this is why you need a very important process of reflective equilibrium when you look at the practices and you go up. This is why I've introduced the axioms and the philosophical tenets of Islamic finance to keep on coming back and forth between the practice and the philosophical tenets to actually come up with the principles that really do show the essence of the practice, why we're actually doing this and why do we need Islamic finance. So yeah, I'm not trying to claim that Islamic finance is actually perfection. So that's one thing. Regarding depreciation, it's definitely an investment-oriented system. It's because money shouldn't be of value. You always need to invest it, and this is why idle money will be a complete loss. So it's always focusing on manufacturing, focusing on employment, focusing on farmers and agriculture. So it's focusing on the poor. However, not only as loans, or actually because loans are not permissible, but rather as trade and investments. So that's the main thing. Regarding difficulty, well, to be honest, it's usually expected that because there are different schools of thought, there would be difficulty in finding like different opinions. But actually, when it comes to Islamic finance, opinions are the differences are not as severe and as divert. And at the same time, when you look at the differences, they become very informative when you come up with a principle of distributive justice. When you read why the different schools have considered different approaches to different things, it opens up a lot of issues and a lot of answers to what it's actually trying to achieve. So I don't think this was a problem. The only problem is exactly what the audience here has spotted, is the actual, not the practices that I'm talking about, but the actual day-to-day practice where they start to find out a way to have the form of Sharia compliant, but not the substance that you're trying to achieve. This is the one thing that is becoming problematic with the Sharia law, I would have to say.
I have three things to respond. Number one is asked by that whether Forest Rights Act is good or not, or whether it is a marginal improvement on the rights and livelihood questions of the marginalized. My response is, well, there is no doubt that this new Forest Rights Legislation Act, they definitely added some ammunition in the hands of the tribals to fight against the state's onslaught against their denial of rights. And that is exactly this legislation actually helped the tribals to secure their rights in Niyamgiri. The Supreme Court used this space as a reference point to give them the rights of their deciding whether they want mining or not. So definitely it has its positive impacts. Regarding the question whether it is a marginal improvement or not, I would say if at all there is some impediment, definitely it is going to be the state. Because wherever we see that there is a violation of the Forest Rights Act, it is the agency of the state which seriously compromises on the legislation front, and they always deny rights in some form or the other. So I would say that even though we legislate certain things, the state creates some hindrances, just like the 73rd Amendment Act that empowering the panchayats. So that we have also a piece of legislation to empower people, but at the same time this state also creating a collective entity to protect their self-interest. For example, that's what I was discussing about, that when you go back to Hobbes' Leviathan, that it was the interest of right to protect of that interest of the self-preservation, individual interest of self-preservation, that actually invited people to come together and protect themselves. So that is the reason. So ontological individualism creates some kind of psychology that yes, we should come together and create something to protect our own interest, not group interest. It's actually individual interest. So it's a very interesting question asked by Professor Sitaraman, that this is actually a problem with liberal political philosophy, that what about the question of the fight between individual and the community, what about the fight between communities and communities, that at least these reasons actually compelled Swain not to discuss about communities at large. Basically he likes to, he never discusses about that communitarian perspective at large. He always tries to look at all the problems with that liberal political philosophy. And that is why two important questions remain unanswered in Swain's political philosophy. The question, Swain and of course his school of capability approach, the number one problem is that what you said, that what will happen when the problem with different communities they fight, the conflict between communities and communities. And the second question, which I am adding now, is what will happen when the community becomes regressive. We don't have any rights within a community. Suppose today the community that I belong does not allow me to have some preferences that I want. At that point, what will happen? So these are some of the problems that actually a capability approach is, these problems are part of the capability approach framework. But to answer this question, I would like to go back to Rawls' political liberalism, that overlapping consensus. I believe to address this question, that conflict between communities, I think Rawls' political liberalism gives a better solution than Swain's capability approach, because we give emphasis on the dialogue between communities, so that something positive will come out, and so that will be the some common agenda will be there to govern the state and society. So I think to respond to this particular question, I think Rawls' political liberalism is more appropriate than Swain's capability approach. Thank you.
Well, that is debatable, Gyanaranjan, in any case, but I'm sure we have listened to three wonderful presentations and very good responses. Let's all give them a big hand. And
I thank you all for participating and asking questions.